Hello, Brahmisha and Victor. Am I audible?
Sorry?
Yeah, here is Kafif. Am I audible?
Oh. Thank you so much to all of you who are joining. We'll start. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are joining us from across the globe. I mean, it's really fantastic to have all of you who are here together with us in the room, but also many of you who are joining us virtually from different regions, from different countries. A warm welcome to this event, the CFS side event on moving from global to local and translating youth policy recommendations at the local level so that they can inform local level action. Just to start, my name is Victor Mugo. I come from the World Food Forum and I lead local youth action. And we are joined together by a group of panelists from diverse areas of work. And we'll be hearing from them on transformative modalities for which we can use really to translate these policy recommendations that were released by CFS at the local level, and so that we can be able to have local action. One of the things that we have realized and we continue to recognize and continue to champion is that achieving a better food future for everyone requires us to think global, but also act local. A top-down approach to achieving food systems transformation does not work. What we really need to do is to ensure that we can build our agri-food systems from the ground up in a way in which we can ensure efficient, inclusive, just, and sustainable agri-food systems. At the local level is the best place to maximize opportunities for young people's participation in agri-food systems. And it really makes sense that if the challenges that we are facing at the global level are also inherently local, then the solutions to these challenges also need to be local and informed by local young people, local communities, and our accountability really needs to be at the, with local youth and local communities in a bid to create a global transformation. After inclusive consultations with different stakeholders, including the youth, the CFS endorsed policy guidelines on promoting youth engagement and employment in agri-food systems during the last edition of CFS. And these guidelines really construct young people individually and also collectively as active agents of change. And they usually also provide useful pathways to promote young people's engagement and employment in agri-food systems. But we have seen that the visibility, the dissemination, the usability of these CFS policy guidelines is still at a laboratory level, and our thoughts here really could be able to inform youth transformative initiatives, youth transformative interventions that could come out of this very useful guidelines. I know I could go on for a long time. I'm really passionate about this, and at the World Food Forum, we're really passionate about young people's empowerment for a better food future. But we have together with us a friend of the youth who has extreme support of different stakeholders, and he has been working extremely hard to ensure that young people are brought at the forefront on the discussions on agri-food systems. We couldn't have a better person to start us off with keynote remarks other than Ambassador Marcel. So we are really privileged to have you around here, and we want to provide you with the first opportunity to provide thought leading remarks on how we can be able to promote these policy guidelines and how we can also lead to local youth action. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Victor, and good afternoon, and I think also good morning and good evening to the colleagues and people online. Thank you for those kind words, and thank you for having me here. What I try to do in the next couple of minutes is indeed go into the process of how the recommendations actually came about last year. As you know, and as you referred to, 2022 was the year that the CFS adopted the guidelines, or the recommendations, I should say. But there was quite a bit of a process leading up to that. So I will go into that a little bit. Then I will share with you a few examples of how we in the Netherlands, both globally but also here in Rome, work on the involvement and the engagement of youth in what we do in our policy making, but also in the diplomatic actions that we try to engage in. And then finally, I hope to share a few lessons and observations with you that are hopefully fruit for thought and maybe for further discussion. But let me start with last year, or even the year before that, when the idea came up to discuss youth and youth engagement and youth employment in the CFS and come up with recommendations for member states and other stakeholders in that context. As you perhaps remember, my Swiss colleague was leading that process within the CFS, and he quickly realized that there's this formal trajectory that could lead to those recommendations, but it would be smart to also develop something informal in the margins and the sidelines of those negotiations. And that is where we came in as well. As the Netherlands, we engaged, and we joined him in what became labeled the Snack the System, a process beyond the negotiations to actually engage with many stakeholders to actually get those recommendations worked out, but also accepted amongst the members of the CFS. And I would like to share a few lessons that we drew from the several consultations that we organized. And you can also remember those were the days of COVID, so we did a lot of this online. But doing that online actually helped us to engage people globally. And how we did it and what network we used, I will say a little bit about it later. But let me share the 8 lessons that came out of that process and that we also used as input into the negotiations itself. So I think that process in itself, using the informal to influence the formal, was a good example of youth engagement that led to those recommendations. And I'm going over those 8 lessons, so bear with me, but I think those are informative. Number 1 is on youth-led policy making. It says, give youth a permanent seat at the decision-making table from the beginning of the process, because youth participation is not about a procedural requirement, but is about structural engagement. So it's a term structural that really comes back here. Second, on intergenerational leadership. Connect our leaders of today to our leaders of tomorrow in order to encourage mutual trust and stimulate the sharing of goals, experiences, and knowledge between generations. 3, professional networks. Facilitate young people in extending their networks, which are invaluable for effective youth participation, but challenging and time-consuming to create. 4, financial resources. compensate young people financially for their activities and expenses. For example, for participation in conferences, and this was an interesting quote, and I want to share that with you. One of the participants said, "Passion does not pay the bills," and I think that is something to also for others involved in this to realize. Youth engagement is not something that comes for free. So an important one that might come back later in the discussions. 5, another one that is important, the use of language. Be aware of possible language barriers, and that's not necessarily French, Spanish, and etc., but it's also the jargon that we use in whatever policy circle we're active in. Be aware of people that are, because they are young, are usually new to a policy domain, not always understand what is being said and what is built up over years. So be aware of what you say and how you say it. Then capacity building has to do with the previous points. Empower youth and strengthen their capacity to bring the innovative and creative solutions to the table by investing in mechanisms and platforms that aim to improve their skills and knowledge. Something I think that is a segue to what happened here last week, but definitely something to build on. Then diversity, and that's a point I will get back to later on as well. Engage a wider diversity of youth to ensure inclusive participation. And from my engagement with youth representatives, I know that they struggle with this themselves as well. That's it's all too easy to tap into your academic networks or to your own social circles. To really be inclusive is a challenge, as it is for many generations, but also for young people. And then finally, learning by doing. And that basically says create a space where you can make mistakes. That is when you enter a new domain, you do not know everything, and some ideas might be better than others, but allow us and create a safe space to make those mistakes. As said, we included these lessons into the formal process, and that led ultimately to the CFS recommendations, which I will not read here. But as you know, those recommendations have different angles. The one is on meaningful participation. Many of the others are actually more on employment in the agriculture and food systems. I'll leave that aside. I'll focus here in these 10 minutes that I have on the engagement part, also because I can use examples from my own practice and my own work to illustrate those. So you might get back to the employment part and the action in the field later. This is about how you engage youth in policymaking and political processes. And that's building on what the youth recommendations and how they describe young people as active agents of change in agri-food systems. And the Netherlands recognized that and builds on that, but also it's kind of aligned with several initiatives that we already had in place. Two things that I'll just mention here and that are easily to Google, and I think for many of you that might be interesting to look at. First is the Youth at Heart strategy, and that includes Youth at Heart principles. They are a bit similar to what I just read as the outcome of our consultations here in Rome, but these have become part and parcel of our development cooperation strategies across the board. So in many of the interventions that the Netherlands does and works on and partners on in countries across the globe, these principles are or should be part of the policy making and the implementation. So Youth at Heart. For that, we actually have an ambassador for youth employment and education. Some of you actually know him. We were just talking about him, that he visited some of the countries that are active on this as well. And that illustrates that we, when we don't have a minister available and ready to travel to a country on this topic, we have a dedicated ambassador at large to advocate for these principles and to see how we can implement them. And then another thing that is easily to Google, and that is the We Are Tomorrow partnership, which is another interesting initiative that is a kind of peer-to-peer learning. In the Netherlands, since about 5-6 years, maybe 7, there is a very active young climate movement, a movement that is in the meantime already representing 70 to 80 youth-led organizations aiming to influence climate policy in the Netherlands. And they matured very quickly, but they also decided we want to share the lessons that we learned along the way with colleagues in the rest of the world. So in 12 countries at the moment, there is a kind of a peer-to-peer learning in what is called the We Are Tomorrow partnership to see how we can actually stimulate young people active as climate ambassadors in other countries. And this is supported financially, tapping into that quote that I just had on passion doesn't pay the bill. This is financially supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then what I should mention here in this context is that we have UN youth representatives, like several other countries have that as well. This program goes back to 1970 already. So we have former UN youth representatives that have already retired. So that's how long this program runs. And as we speak, we have two of them in Rome for this conference. They are the UN youth representatives on food and biodiversity. And we try to engage them in what we do. They are part of our official delegation, but they are not encapsulated. So you should really talk to them to see what their experience is and how they are involved on what we do here as an official delegation. I would like to zoom in on that and on Rome a little bit, and of course, doing that on these experiences. Maybe also saying something about the World Food Forum. Several of you have been here since last week because that was, of course, the platform for youth and youth engagement. Also very young. This was the second edition. And last year, I observed that the presence of Dutch youth was at least scattered and not really organized and coherent. So what we did was we tried to get them together and see how they could join forces. And this ultimately led to the formation of a chapter in the Netherlands, a youth-led chapter for the World Food Forum. And I think that's another good example of how you can organize yourself to amplify your voice and to also work on what you want to say, the messages that you have, and use the specific expertise that you have in your own local networks. Another example of last week is the Youth Food Lab. I won't elaborate on that one, but it's I think it was a very successful event during the World Food Forum. Again, to engage youth across the globe through a challenge and see how they could be supported also with knowledge, a little bit of financial support, but also with the connections across the globe between the different initiatives that came up of that. That was really an empowering tool, an inspirational event as well. And that ultimately leads into something that will be continued next years with a specific lab, a physical lab in Wageningen at the famous agricultural university. How much time do I still have? A few more minutes. Let me go into to what we can do better. That might be good for the meeting that we are having here today. And of course, when I prepared for this little speech, I asked my colleague, the UN youth representative, Ida Simonsen, for her input. And a lot of what I'm going to say here now has been provided by her as well, because that's what at least the Dutch youth representatives do. They give honest and direct feedback, and they are also not hesitant to tell us what we could do better. The first point on that one was we could leverage the expertise of youth better. So it's not only of engaging and creating the platform, but also tapping into specific fields of expertise that these young representatives bring. So that was a point for improvement. And secondly, and that taps into one of the lessons that I mentioned earlier, is ensure structural involvement. And that's not only at conferences like these, but also in the preparation. So when the policies are actually formulated and when instructions are put on paper in capitals, because that's how normally these conferences work. A lesson, I think, for many youth organizations that came up is that challenge of how representative and inclusive are you? And that's not a given. That's hard work, and that's what Ida said as well. It's really hard work to tap into the diverse constituency that you have. A good example that she mentioned to me was the Menu for Tomorrow consultations that were held in the Netherlands. Something I think you should ask her about, but it's one of the ways to get in all the information and inputs that could be useful for an event like this. Then make meaningful, and that's a term that we hear a lot, make meaningful something with substance. So not necessarily meaningful because we like each other or we are in the same room. No, get into the substance of what's on the agenda. Talk about what we try to accomplish and move on to the objectives of a meeting. So that is substance instead, or maybe on top of process. What I said already is integrate youth in the formal process. And that is an interesting one, and I think also a lesson learned for the World Food Forum. The World Food Forum is a separate space for youth, which was and is useful. But to me, it's only a phase. We should move on and get the connections, connect the dots with the formal processes, including the CFS that we are having this week. How do the things that were discussed last week land into the formal process? Or even better, how are youth integrated in the different mechanisms and stakeholders at the table this week? That means connections between the World Food Forum, also the Food Systems Summit follow-up, and also the CFS. And that is a point of legitimacy. And how you give the youth representatives, wherever they come from, the powers that are necessary to be influential. Finally, getting to my conclusions, Victor, and just a few. I think you can have many conclusions yourself already listening to all the points that I brought up. And also, I think one conclusion is it's already much better than where we came from. Despite us having 43 years of experience with youth representatives in delegations, the past, I would say, 4 or 5 years have really seen a revolution in youth participation, and that is something to be proud of, but not necessarily something to sit back. All the points that I mentioned really mean hard work. So that's one conclusion. The second one I mentioned as well is move beyond meaningful participation, get into effective influence, and that is, of course, hard to measure, but something that you will feel. Are my points being taken seriously, or are they just gracefully accepted and pushed aside? That's an interesting one. Be aware, and this is especially to the youth, but also to others that work with youth, is be aware of youth washing, a term you know, but it's sometimes difficult to recognize. Develop an eye to recognize that. And I, over the years, worked with many UN youth representatives, and the one was better at that than the other. But they learned to say no. Even if the Secretary General of the UN invites you on the podium, but you are not allowed to say anything, you are there for the photo opportunity, say no. I've seen UN youth representatives doing that, and that was a very powerful statement. And then finally, also learn to accept no. That is the hard work of politics and policy making. It's a space full of disappointments and suboptimal compromises. I've learned that over the past 25 years, being active in different roles. As youth, you're ambitious, and you, of course, want that your good ideas make it to the finishing line. That's not always going to happen, but it should not be by lack of trying. Good luck with all of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Marcel, for those rousing remarks. I mean, structural engagement, intergenerational leadership inclusivity, learning by doing, and also ensuring mutual trust among different people of different generations, professional networks, but most importantly, financial resources that also need to go into youth initiatives. And the natural flow of engagement should move from meaningful participation into influence. And we really have gotten that from your speech. And we are really proud of the work that the Kingdom of the Netherlands is doing in leading the way, in providing thought leadership with 43 years of youth delegations, which is really outstanding. But I believe that we can also continually work together to ensure that this moves to the next stage.
I realize it's 53 actually, if I do the math correctly.
Absolutely, 53. Yeah, so thanks so much for that. You also mentioned connecting the dots between different youth platforms, between the World Food Forum and different global initiatives. And here together with us, we are joined by Pramisha Tapalia, who's the head of youth policy track at the World Food Forum, who's going to be talking about the outcomes of the World Food Forum flagship event, and also looking at areas in which we can be able to connect the dots between the different bodies of work that is happening within the World Food Forum, and also with different global forums, and especially within the CFS. Pramisha, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Victor. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Ambassador Marcel for explaining the process leading to negotiations and endorsements on policy guidelines on promoting youth engagement and employment in the agri-food systems, and also for explaining the synergies of these policy recommendations with the initiatives of the Dutch government and highlighting the joint initiatives with the World Food Forum. I also want to congratulate CFS Secretariat on endorsing the voluntary guidelines on gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment in the context of food security and nutrition. Since vast majority of unemployed youth are young women, and it is really essential to empower women and girls, especially from rural setting, in the context of food security and nutrition. Today, I'm glad to be here to brainstorm with you. Before I start, I want you to think about one question which you can answer in the end of my intervention. It is for both in-person attendees and also online participants who are joining us online. We all know that we have very good policy recommendations in the paper, reports, and compendiums, but when it comes to the action in local level, we can see a lot of gaps and barriers. So I want you to think of at least one solution in your region or country, and how can we use the existing youth networks and platforms in local level, especially countries, on implementing the policy recommendations that we have in these global spaces and international fora, including CFS, World Food Forum, UN Food Systems Stock-Taking Moment, and many more when it comes to agri-food systems transformation. So I want you to think about it a little more, and I will come back to you in the end of my intervention. So last week during the World Food Forum Flagship Week, in the Youth Assembly, young people from all across the world came together and discussed various policy priorities based on the regions and themes, including food waste, agroecology, education, school feeding programs, and food systems priorities also in the context of climate change, biodiversity, land, drought, and desertification. Right now, we're developing to work on 2024 Global Action Plan based on the policy priorities that we discussed over the last year and also during the Youth Assembly last week. Some common themes that we identified were education, capacity building, financing, multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral collaborations, meaningful partnerships with youths from the local to the international level, and inclusion of all stakeholders in the process of agri-food systems transformation, including young people, women, farmers, indigenous peoples, and marginalized communities. As we can see in these different spaces, young people have a capacity to advocate on these topics and priorities in their home countries, as well as in the global policy spaces. But the real challenge is, how do we implement these when it comes to action? How do young people work together with their respective government? How to ensure that the priorities that we identified in Rome is not watered down, but actually discussed in the respective youth groups, youth organizations, constituencies, and in the respective parliaments and ministries back in their home country. In 2020, during CFS 50, as also explained by Ambassador Marcel, CFS endorsed the policy recommendations in promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. One of the important policy recommendations was recognition of the multiple and diverse voices that young people can bring to sustainable food systems transformation, and guarantee and encourage equal, non-discriminatory, and active participation of youth in formal governance mechanisms on food security and nutrition in decision-making for at all levels. So there are also other policy recommendations that you can find in the report. So given these recommendations are non-binding and voluntary in nature, how can governments and relevant stakeholders support youths and work together to implement these policy recommendations, since it is non-binding as well as voluntary? How can we create an alliance of the concerned stakeholders in the countries who will be following up with implementation and making governments accountable by monitoring their action? We also have Food Systems Coordination Hub, with supporting countries to implement their national pathways. So there is another question: how can young people co-work with government in the implementation of national pathways? And we had some discussion during the World Food Forum Flagship Week last week as well. These all questions lead to one single question: how to foster local action and implementation to ensure food security and nutrition for all. So food security and nutrition is one of the major pillars of agri-food systems transformations. All of these policy processes and priorities, we come together for a single goal, which is providing affordable and accessible healthy food for everyone with environment and human-centric approach. Because people, in the end, we care about food in our plate. We can't think about other aspects when we are hungry in the first place. People care about the dignified livelihood. Access to food and nutrition also provides multiple benefits, including job creation, economic growth, and poverty reduction. So, and thanks to different spaces, including CFS, where governments and all concerned stakeholders can come together to work and bring the policy recommendations back to home. And also thanks to spaces like World Food Forum, where young people from any background, region, country can come together and work on issues they feel is important. We had Global Youth Forum, Hand-in-Hand Investment Forum, Science and Innovation Forum, Global Indigenous Youth Forum, where 6,000 people from all across the world attended in person last week. We all are working towards the same goal, but we feel like there is more space to create synergies, foster the dialogue so that we can join hands together for local action. We all are connected, but still disconnected in some form, so we need to create synergies on that. To translate these policy recommendations into action, we need to work with existing youth-led and youth-focused initiatives on ground and giving them agency and independence. Be it the local independent organizations or the branch of global entities like World Food Forum national chapters, YPAD local chapters, ES national chapters, IFSA local chapters. We have some of the youths from these organizations joining online as well. So all these local organizations in respective countries need to join force, form an alliance, and reach out to the government and work together. There will be significant barriers in realizing this, where the youth entities need support from the stakeholders who believe in their mission and help in realizing these policy recommendations to action. We have seen the leadership of some of the members, including Netherlands, Ireland, on how members can work meaningfully with the young people, and these best practices can be replicated by other member states as well. The implementation actions and strategies, as we know, are context specific. So now again, I want to go back to the questions that I posed before and request you to tell what could be the solution in your region or country on how can we use the existing youth networks and platforms in local level, especially countries, on implementing these policy recommendations that we have in global and international policy spaces. So if anyone wants to share either online or in person, please, you have the floor. Yeah, Abdullah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Abdullah from Bangladesh. So what I think how youth organization on the context of Bangladesh, there is a lot of youth organization working in the same thing, same ideas. And what I find out youth organizations lacking in fun, and also Marcel mentioned about that funding is a crucial fact. So each organization may have small funds and they do the activities. So as you also said, the working together. So countries like Bangladesh, I think working together, this word is the first priority when we are thinking about working on global policies, translating in local actions. So if we can bring all of those organizations that were working for the agri-food system under the same roof, and then it can lead up to a big issues. Now our government is also prioritizing some of the issues, for example, happening in deltas. Bangladesh is a delta country. We have a delta plan that we developed with Netherlands, but I'm not sure how much it's implemented. But I think youth can really take a big part focusing on these, but if they join first together.
Thank you so much, Abdullah, for highlighting the need of connection, joining the forces, and creating the synergies. Any other intervention? Okay, please go ahead.
I'm Mohamed Samo from Sierra Leone. Actually, our country has faced a lot, ranging from civil war for over 10 years, Ebola, and several other things. But quite recently, we have seen a progress, specifically in the legislative aspect. We have seen wherein the current executive of our president is comprised of young people. Yes, young people below the age of 35. Even our chief minister is a young person. So we've seen the passion from the government moving towards pushing young people at the forefront. And in Sierra Leone, young people are growing, and with the help of technology, they are developing their own initiatives and they are driving it. It's actually a little bit challenging, moving responsibility from the old folks to the young ones, and which is actually timely at this moment, because young people are seen as the troublemakers in most cases. When there is crisis, the young people are used as tools, and we suffer the most. And when these crises are coming, in most cases, we are not responsible in creating them. So the awareness is actually raising where young people are now trying to own farms, trying to own initiative ideas, and see how best we can drive it. But it is challenging because there are no resources to support those ideas, you know. But we hope with this kind of platform, we'll be able to create that kind of connections through knowledge sharing, sharing of technology, and see how best we can connect the whole of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. And as we also already discussed, recognizing youths as an experts and supporting their innovative ideas would also be crucial to foster the local action in countries. So with all these conversations, I think we can agree on some common themes: connection, creation of synergies, having conversations, and recognition of youths as an expert. So with that, I pass the floor back to Victor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pramisha. Yeah, and for connecting the dots between the different aspects, and how even while connecting these dots, this can really translate into local action in different communities, in different cities, and in different countries. And thanks so much for the two interventions from different parts of the world, Bangladesh and Sierra Leone, on how we can move all this to mobilize local youth action. So thank you so much for that. We'll be moving swiftly into the next panel. And we have different youth-led organizations from across the globe that are joining us. Some of the largest youth organizations are here together with us, and we'll be thinking about how can youth-led organizations really translate policy recommendations on youth engagement and employment into tangible action at the local level. These organizations are already member-based. They have connections to the ground, and what more can be done to support them to continually fulfill the great job that they are doing. Together with us, we have Rabbi Roth, who couldn't be together with us, I think, because of disease, but we have Ryan Kasim, who will be starting us off, and we'll head over to the virtual speakers from IFSA, from the World Food Forum National Chapter in Tanzania, and as well from the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment. So Ryan, you have the first opportunity to take the floor to consider these questions.
All right, perfect. Thanks a lot, Victor. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm representing Act for Food, Act for Change, which is a youth-led initiative that emerged after the UN Food Systems Summit. It was the main youth-led organization trying to engage with the Food Systems Summit. But also Real Food Systems, which is another initiative that is connected with youth on the ground and specific young farmers as well. I'll talk about policy recommendations as a first step of our initiative in Act for Food, Act for Change. What we did was that we did a global consultation with 300,000 young people from across the world, and we came up with 10 actions for change. And these are the ones that we recommend at the global level. These are found on Act for Food, Act for Change's website, so they are publicly available and you can take a look at them. We've also had 100,000 young people from across the world pledge to change the food systems, but we thought that was not enough, so we had to get into the actions for change. Today, I'd like to focus on these global actions for change and specifically on one, as right now I'm trying to lead on that action for change at a national level, and this is how I will share my experience, at least at the country level. Number 9, if you scroll to the website, you see that we have an action for change that, at least it's a policy ask from the youth, to protect food production and distributions from political disruptions, conflicts, and the effects of climate change. Right now, I am representing the country of Lebanon, unofficially, but we do have a crisis over there, an economic crisis, and now on the verge of war as well. I can see that food is still being used as a weapon. And that's something that we advocate against, that food is never used as a weapon, and that young people are usually the ones who have to pay the price of food insecurity and malnutrition. And so with this, we're trying to work with the national convener of the country, of Lebanon, who was here at the Food Systems Summit, and who's also the SDG 2030 Agenda Parliamentarian Commission, or heads that commission in Lebanon. And we're trying to work with her in order to advocate for the right to food, because she's also the special rapporteur for Lebanon specific on the right to food with the parliament. And we're trying to have that as a legislative ask or a policy ask with her. And she's really trying to fight hard for that. And she did announce this on this podium, actually, back in July of this year. This is the first step for us, at least, to achieve this global action for change. Number 9 is to have this right to food that is embedded in the legislation of the Lebanese parliament. With that, we're also trying to switch away from the continuous band-aid narrative of having food aid as a solution for food insecurity and malnutrition for young people who are based in regions where there's war and conflict and economic crises, or at least the distribution of food is not accessible to these young people, so that because there's a lot of funding, and you talk about funding in specific, and we can see that the funding comes a lot to the UN agencies trying to support these young people via food aid. We don't think that that's very healthy for young people, and we also don't think that's a sustainable solution over a course of 10 years. Unfortunately, these conflicts are lasting more than 5 or 6 years, so it's definitely okay for a year, 2, 3, but we don't think it's a sustainable solution moving down the line over 10, 11 years, unfortunately, with these conflicts. So our priority for Lebanon now is to have the right to food becoming like a policy ask within the parliament. But second, also to have that food availability and affordability are the second priority for Lebanese youth. And we know that there is a dissociation between those who can afford a healthy diet, but those who also can't afford a diet at all, not even a healthy one. So those are the very specific asks for Lebanon. And I'm bringing this up so that I can ask, at least if somebody has tried to do that at a national level or regional level, we'd love to collaborate. We'd love to see your learnings on this. Fortunately for us, I would say this positively, that our national convener has been very supportive until the moment with this, and she's been leading on this very well, given especially that she's the only parliamentarian who is the national convener for the Food Systems Summit in the world. So this is a big plus for us. It's by coincidence for my side. And yeah, I think that's what we're trying to focus on at the national level. And as a global movement, I think each youth is trying to see which action for change, one or more than one, really fit their national context, as you all have different national contexts. And trying to advocate for that, not only via the national conveners, but also via youth-led initiatives on the ground. For us, that's working directly with the parliament. But for other youth in different countries, there are different measures to do that. Yeah. Back to you, Victor. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ryan. A round of applause to Ryan for that great intervention. Working with national conveners at the country level is really crucial. And I mean, we are really fortunate to hear a great example of Lebanon, where young people are working with their national convener to look at ways in which they can be shifting global policies really reflected at the local level. So thank you so much for that. I will move on swiftly, and hopefully we'll have a Q&A session. So please put up your questions. Get ready with your questions. I see some of them that are already online, and so we'll actually answer those questions as well. But we'll be moving on swiftly to our next speaker, who's already online, and we'll be talking from an ES perspective. An IFSA perspective, my apologies, the International Forestry Students Association. Rizka, are you together with us, and will you just take the virtual floor?
All right, then. Thank you, Victor. But then I cannot open my camera since the house stopped it. So maybe you could allow me to start my camera to more interactive with the in-person participant as well. I thank you. And then please come up with my presentation as well, Victor, that I've sent to you before.
Yes, if you could just go ahead with that as we put that on screen.
Okay, then. Thank you so much. So the first question that we have on our priorities right now is, when will we start involving youth instead of promoting youth? Being represent is not enough. Do not only speak nothing, but please real action now. This is our permanent question, which is staying in our mind forever, right? And hopefully this side even could help to answer your question at the moment. And here I, Rizka Afif, am one of IFSA member, or International Forestry Student Association, and standing as the head of World Food Forum Subcommission for 2021 and 2023. And I'm standing here on behalf of IFSA, and IFSA is completely committed to support in mobilizing youth-led local action and support the CFS policy guidelines on promoting youth engagement and employment in agri-food system. IFSA is one of the largest youth-led forestry organization. We repeated like forestry organization, connecting, educating, and empowering the next generation of youth with green perspective. We have over 140 local committees, or LC, with over 60 countries. We absolutely consisting of the competences students, and we are running globally but impacting locally either. And if the presentation is appearing now, you can see that we are not only consisting from the undergraduate student of forestry and related science only, but then we are consisting as well from the master students as well as PhD students. It concludes that IFSA is very concrete organization which could support the forestry and green-based local action, because of we are consisting from the well-known educated member as well. And although the largest global IFSA activities are organized by its international body, a majority of the projects done in IFSA are organized on a local level by the local committees that I mentioned before. We have more than 140 local committees around the world, and we have 7 regions, like starting from Asia Pacific until Latin America. We considered it crucial to showcase those LC projects so that we can exchange inspiration with each other and motivate others to organize LC project as well. Move this slide to We have several local actions, but then we are organize and wrap it onto the global action, which local people could also join to our project back then in 2022 until 2023. The first one, we have IFSA Ayufro Africa book projects. This project's overall goal is to motivate and inspire young people to pursue forest-related studies and also careers in Africa by increasing the visibility of careers option and young Africa role models working in forest-related fields. But then it's not only for forestry; it's more concerned as well to the agroforestry as one of scheme combining the forestry and agriculture itself. And this also help in offering visibility to forestry profession in Africa. So the book is conclude many things that we could read, like starting from the young profession that we could take, and also success story from Africa, young forestry professional from there. And also we have IFSA tree learning, as you can see at our website, the ifsa.net. If you could check right now, this platform was made to respond to the needs of forestry students to fill in the gaps left by their formal education, because we believe that in the formal education we couldn't get as much as soft skill that we could get in roundtable or in outside of the school. And you will find the main content divided into two main categories. The first one is soft skill, and the second one is forestry topics. In addition to which you can find information about different careers in forestry. So wrap up from starting from the careers and soft skill and online materials that we could utilize it to our soft skill enhancement, and also links to other useful online courses and materials from the past IFSA delegation as we attend the World Food Forum flagship within 2023 last week, and we are going to upload it onto our IFSA tree learning platform. The third one, we have Youth Forest Policy Days 2022, and we are planning to make it in 2024, a conference like online event organized by Youth for Youth and enable the youth community to exchange knowledge and gain more insight about international forest policies, an opportunity to active get involved in policy and learn how to make a difference. It's the goal from the Youth Forest Policy Days 2022. Meet other youth there with similar interests, network with policy expert, and get inspired to take an action. And hopefully we could able to realize it next year together with many entities, especially the food system transformation entities such as FAO or even WFF itself, as we are aware about food system transformation and look back to our previous engagement in supporting local action. And since this year is our second year collaboration with World Food Forum, so we are still planning about how do we connecting the dots. Yet we consider to give some action proposal based on our 3 pillars of strategy 2021 until 2023. 2026, my apologies, as you can see at the first presentation. The first one that we are planning is organized workshop and training sessions on sustainable forest management, agroforestry, and integrated land use planning. Like we because we are based on the students, so we are more focused on educate students and the community about the importance of trees in ensuring sustainable food system. The trees not only utilized for wood, but then like we have multi-purpose tree species which product fruit, wood, and non-wood product itself. And also create educational materials, online courses, and informational resources about sustainable forestry and its significance into food systems. And we have tree learning, as I mentioned before, and we believe it will be a concrete platform on promoting youth engagement and employment in agri-food system transformation. We are able to collaborate with WFF and FAO as well as other organizations to create materials or even book to showcase success stories among the world young forestry professionals and create awareness on career opportunities and success of young forestry professionals, young agroforestry professionals, young agriculture professionals in the field of agroforestry as one of the food system transformation scheme that we propose, because we are coming from the forestry perspective, so we are not I don't want to talk about the agriculture itself, but more to collaboration between the forestry and agriculture itself. If we are able to, we would like to collaborate further with WFF and FAO to make a collaboration book to conduct novel student-based empirical research on agroforestry networking organization. And we would like to create a success stories of young forestry, agriculture, agroforestry professionals who support agroforestry, and then listing of territory institution offering agroforestry and related programs on the all continents. We also are planning to make IFSA Job Fair 2024, as well as Youth Forest Policy Day 2024. And we are happy to invite you to engage and involve with us to give the perspective of how food system transformation work, of how the professional on agroforestry systems work, and etc. We have 2 regional representative each IFSA regionals, because we have 7 IFSA regionals, and then we could conclude that we have 14 regional representative that will connect the dots beyond the head of World Food Forum Subcommission, because in IFSA we have a head of World Food Forum Subcommission, which will connect between the WFF and IFSA Global, not IFSA Global, but then like IFSA Local as well. Again, as a youth nonprofit organization, we have a limitation. You know, like we are youth, we need support, and we could not stand alone, and we are still making a mistake. Hence, to realize our visions and take the next steps, multi-stakeholders should support and increase long-term collaboration, as well as sustainable finance for many youth-led organizations that have established, such as IFSA. We completely recognize that we have many brilliant ideas to implement CFS policy guidelines, but without collaboration, we are nothing. We are here not only just talk with zero impact, but then we are waiting for tomorrow collaboration. We are not the future here, but we are the future determinants. Thank you, Victor. I give back to you.
Thank you, Rizka, for that very interesting perspective. Really activities on the ground that IFSA is doing, an international organization bringing together Forestry Students Association, and also working on the intersection of forestry and agriculture as well. So thank you so much for that. I think we will go directly into the next speaker, who's also joining from online, Famba Kazimoto. You have about 5 minutes to talk about what the national chapter in Tanzania is engaging in, and how that could be transformational in implementing the CFS policy guidelines.
Thank you so much, Victor. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our thoughts on what exactly the Tanzania National Chapter is doing. And I was delighted the Tanzania National Chapter, the World Food Forum Tanzania National Chapter, it came in as the second chapter. It was related to come as the second chapter working after the Netherlands chapter. So when Ambassador Marcel was sharing thoughts and when he was mentioning about the Netherlands World Food Forum chapter, I was happy that the Tanzania National Chapter came in first as an African chapter. And during our existence, there are some of the things that we have tried to highlight, and of course, exactly what we thought could be strategic interventions to keep strategic involvement of youth in the food systems value chain. And I'll just highlight some 4, if not 5 key points of what exactly we have done, what we have tried to highlight, and what we think could be the strategic move for us to make a meaningful youth participation in the food system value chain. One, we just highlighted the fact that there are so many policies and strategies in place, and they're all good in writings, but there is a gap between the policies, policymakers, and the youth themselves. The policies are designed in an international context, but again, who are the people who are sitting definition in context. I'll give an example. We have different law contexts. So when policies are adopted, when the policies are adopted, we thought it would really be meaningful that these policies are domesticated in different national contexts so that they reflect exactly what are the demands and the priorities of the countries. Unless we could be adopting policies and they could be adopting strategies, but if they do not align exactly with what the country priorities are and the need of the youth in specific nationalities, then the policies will just be remaining in writing as what we have been saying for the past years, and the strategies have not been working exactly to the extent that we want. And I'll just give an example of what the national chapter in Tanzania has done. During the Africa Food Systems Summit that happened just recently in Dar es Salaam, we organized a parliamentarians roundtable between the youth-led organizations that are working in the food system value chains and the members of parliament to try to get an alignment of exactly what is the gap between the youth and the MPs. And what we just came to realize is that the policies are adopted, but the policy makers themselves in the local context, to some point, they're clearly not 100% aware of what is adopted in the international context. And it's not bad, because being a member of parliament or being a policy maker doesn't give you a job. So we think that are adopted to local context, keep understanding exactly what the youth need in the local context and what is their awareness of the policymakers, because they are the ones who will be implementing the policies. They are the ones who will be running the policies. They are the ones who will be allocating the budget and the policies recommendations. So if they are not aware exactly, and if there is a margin of gap between them and the youth in specific countries, then it's mostly like all the beautiful policies and strategies that are adopted in the international context may not exactly reflect to the priorities of the government and the policymakers in the national context. So when we organized the the members of parliament roundtable with the youth, it is in that point whereby it was realized that there has been a gap. The specific committee even highlighted, like, we are there as MPs, we are always available, but the youth themselves don't consult them. So I think we need to close the gap between the policies that are adopted, the policymakers, and the youth, who are the victims and who are the beneficiaries of these policies. That is the first thing that we thought it would really be important. And that would be our recommendation, that in as much as we adopt the policies and strategies, let's see in what context that we can domesticate it to see how they align with the priorities of the government and the specific countries. But another thing we just realized is that we also need to look at the context in how we influence youth to tap into the various food systems value chain. Ambassador Marcel mentioned it very clear that the passion doesn't really pay the bills. What is the perception of the youth who are already in the agriculture sector? I'll give you an example. Tanzania, as a country, we have attained the self-sufficient ratio. We produce at least over 106, more than what we need in the country. But I'll tell you, in the context of what we export, we do not even export to the margin of what we are expecting. What am I trying to mention is the priorities have been kept in one value chain, the production aspect. But the food system value chain have different aspects. There is the production aspect, there is the processing, it goes there and then and then and then. And if these aspects are not well coordinated, it ends in the fact that one aspect may affect the other aspect, because you could really producing, you could really be attaining the food security, and you could really be attaining the self-sufficient ratios. But again, for youth to be able to export,
Thanks so much, Famba. I see you have just mentioned great things and great points there, providing young people with a direct opportunity to engage with parliamentarians as a way in which national policies and global policies really can fit at the local level. So thank you so much for that perspective. A round of applause to Famba, and thank you so much for that useful, great engagement from Tanzania. We'll be heading over to Sarah, and Sarah will be talking about youth-friendly and youth-focused communications, especially with the global policies that are there, and how different policy guidelines can really reflect and be adopted by young people and be disseminated to young people through youth platforms. And so, Sarah, if you are together with us, you can take the floor for the next very few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victor, and thank you all. I hope the connection will not abandon me as I'm connecting from Lebanon. So we always have some issue with the connection, but let's try. So I'm really happy to be here today, especially for the discussion, the focus of the discussion on how it's vital to translate the policy recommendation on youth engagement and employment into tangible action at the local level. I think also that this process has to go hand by hand with the inverse process, and also to try to understand and to step back a little bit to see how to bring the youth-led action to a global climate agenda, a global policy agenda, and also to be integrated to the international policies. So I'm here talking with the head of the FAO Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment, especially for the project Climate Change Knowledge Hub, where we dedicate an area for young people where they actually can find resources tailored to young people, but as well as connected to the peers and colleagues from all over the world. So one of the really close initiative, I think, with the initiative that we're having today is the one that we will launch tomorrow. It's a webinar series, is actually the second episode that will focus on bridging the youth-led action to the global climate agenda. So we will, at FAO, the idea of the webinar was actually to really understand and discuss the strategies within the civil society organization, other main international youth organization, and to understand how policy recommendations that are coming from local initiatives can actually navigate the complex path to the negotiation table. Also, I want to take a moment also to say that it's really important and crucial to also understand that in this very, very, very big global climate negotiation, for example, not everyone has the privilege or has the opportunity to go there. So that's really why we wanted to really go back and to start from the roots of the global policy and how to influence them with the local context, and how the local context actually then goes to the global negotiation. So I invite you really to join us for tomorrow webinars. And I just want to take a moment also to go back to the CFC policy recommendation, just really quickly. I think that it's really important also from a communication point of view to be able to translate that really important document into more accessible, let's say, wording also for digital spaces, and also to actually have a more contact with the local level. So to have an exchange from the country level, and also improve and spread the word within also the communication and the digital spaces. We also want to acknowledge, that beside the fact that we're working with the Knowledge Hub, and there are a lot of resources and all these opportunity that can be available for young people, not only, we also acknowledge that there is still the need to address the structural barriers that there are. So we don't have to forget that there is still a digital divide that it's quite big, and we need to be aware that some of this opportunity can be actually be accessible only to privileged, let's say, people that can actually just have access to internet. So I think we need also to keep it in mind, and also when we talking about how to translate this policy recommendation, also to find strategies, alternative strategies to do so. And I think it's all from my side. Thank you again, and over to you, Victor.
Thank you so much. I really like something that you said, especially on youth-oriented communication, that really embraces youth culture, could be one of the ways in which we can be able to advance the knowledge that is available, and even the CFS policy recommendations themselves, and so that they can become even more understandable and implementable at the local level. So youth-oriented communication is really crucial and should be the next phase going forward. I see we are so much strained of time, and we will continue to answer your questions on the chat section. And I know we had already given an opportunity for us to also ask questions. But as we are closing, we have heard from different youth organizations. We've heard from different perspectives on this challenge that we have, that there are very many global policy recommendations from a global level that are not translating into local action. And we have here together with us Dr. Nicolene Han, who can be able to talk about how we can move from evidence to action, provide us with useful lessons and strategies that I think can close this session, and also that we can reflect on going forward. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Victor, for inviting me. A lot was said, so I won't try to summarize everything because it's impossible, all the passion. Although I do think passion pays some of the bills because it shows you're interested and you want to do it. So I think there is a, how do you call it? We have to figure out both sides. I mean, I was asked by Victor to talk a little bit about how we go from global to local. And just to give you a little bit of a background where I come from. So I come from the CGIAR, which is a global group of research organizations on agriculture. We've been around for about 50, 60 years. We do a lot of technical work, and all of a sudden we realize, women are also part of agriculture. Okay, what do we do? So I work very much on looking at, how do we get women involved in agriculture? And now my mandate has even involved now youth. So I want to start out with a comment that was made already earlier, is that one of the big things we always do need to remember is youth is not only boys and young men, it's also girls and young women. I think this is very important because young girls do have a different specific situation in agriculture. We know about child brides, for instance, which is directly related to agriculture. I mean, there is a direct link there. So please, as you move forward, one small plea at this point is always remember that you do have, women and men in this conversation from the beginning, because I think that is important as we move forward. But that was just slightly on a side. I wanted to congratulate you that you do have these guidelines. Don't underestimate having guidelines or policies. People can use it. And I think that's what everybody in this room needs to start using them. And that's why I like the idea of how do you communicate them better? Because you can start holding people accountable. If you don't even have these, you couldn't even hold people accountable, right? I mean, so you need to start using these so you can hold people accountable. So that's one big lesson. Another thing, I think I have 3 points that I think are, after listening to everybody, that I would love to mention. One is research and data. And I stand here as a researcher, but I will tell you that there's not much research on youth. Use that again, use data. Because everybody, as we notice with gender is very personal and emotive. Everybody has an opinion about what women should do and what men should do, right? So we were really working hard in getting that evidence base. And I think that's where you really need to also start. When you talk about your policies, back them up with the evidence of that country so that the policymaker, okay, that's a problem in my country. So use that very much. I think that's giving a youth a bigger voice if you actually use data. Why I also say this is that, and it was interesting, I think one of the delegates on the floor said it, we still have this binary understanding of youth. Either they're risk takers and are entrepreneurs for the future, or they're troublemakers. But most youth are somewhere in the middle. And we need to start understanding some of that framing. How do we frame it? How do we talk about that better? How do we also have a much more nuanced? How do we target? Every context is slightly different. How do we target that better? Again, using data and research in that is going to be important. So you can move away from, it's my opinion. No, the data shows, and then you have a bigger voice. So very important. But again, invest in research. It's not cheap, I can tell you that. So that's one. The other comment that was made by several people here is about understanding the structures. Start that conversation very early on. In gender work, we've often talked about, well, of course, we need to fix the women, you know, we need to give them more education, we need to give them more access to assets, whatnot more. Yes, important. You need to make sure that youth have it. But the system sometimes is also messed up. And the system doesn't allow youth to be part of it. And I think that's where we had a youth session in Kenya where I live. And it was really interesting because one of the youth said, oh, stop making agriculture sexy, just make it profitable. And then we'll be there. I agree. And so that's why I'm calling on everybody also to start looking at the system, how the system is messed up. Instead of spending a lot of energy and on time on improving the youth, start talking about how the system is messed up. I mean, and there are issues, there are equity issues in the system, we know that. But use data and use research, because otherwise it will just be your opinion. So that would be one of my understand. Then the last but not least, a positive note as well. I think what you're doing here is bringing those connections, bringing everybody together. And I think that's where you can, again, have a bigger voice and you can actually get across groups. We saw about different groups, forestry, etc. I think that's going to be important. How do we actually move those forward? And find your allies. That was one of our big lessons. Find your allies across the world, and they can be of anybody. You'll be surprised where you find your allies. In the process of finding your allies, also be sure you always make a stronger story. One of the big things we did with the work I do is we brought all the information we have together. I mean, if you're ever curious, gender.cgir.org. We brought all the gender and agriculture work together so that we could move it to the next level, so that we don't keep on having that same conversation. So please, and you've inspired me to now see if we can do the same on youth.cgr.org, where we bring all the research on youth in agriculture together so that people know where we're at, and then you can use that data again. So I think those are some of the things, those three things that I think are important. Data and research are important. Understanding the structure and making sure that we fix the structures as well, not just upon the youth to fix themselves, you know. And then last but not least, keep on bringing those connections, because you'd be surprised what works at times, as we've done in a lot of this gender work. And that's why we are so happy. Again, I did want to also reiterate that we have the voluntary guidelines, because again, we can hold people accountable. So don't underestimate what you already have. It is short. I mean, it takes a long time. So I always say three things: be bold, be targeted in what you do. Don't do everything. Be targeted. And last but not least, and especially to you guys, be impatient. Don't be patient. Be impatient and get things done. So that's my closing remark.
Absolutely. I mean, this session just shows that we are impatient to see these policy recommendations get to the local level and inform local initiatives and inform local impact and change. And so on that note, we really appreciate all your attendance, for all the questions that you have raised, for all the remarks that have been made. We really appreciate each and every one of you. And so this is just the beginning of the conversation, that the conversation does not end here. I mean, we need to ensure that we can continually connect to the local levels to continue making this impact and change that we hope to see. So from ourselves, we really appreciate your time and really appreciate your effort, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and do have yourselves a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.